My name is Paola Totaro. I'm a former Europe correspondent for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, and I'm now president of the Foreign Press Association in London, where I live and work. A session called Wild Things. Love the title, because the truth is, as the mother of 4 children ranging between 27 and 13, I think I've earned a PhD in wild thing management. To be honest, I can't believe we've survived 3 stints through the turbulent teenage years, and there's still another one to go. Today, however, we're actually going to go a little further in the discussion than just garden variety teen ups and downs, because we want to focus on youth violence. Are young people really the most violent members of our society? And if so, what are the causes of its prevalence among the youth of the 21st century? Is there a way to equip kids with resilience to resist impulsive behaviours? And how has violence or its omnipresence as a dark, lurking force inspired and shaped the work of the fiction writers that we have here today? If we're to believe the Australian Institute of Criminology, and I don't see why we shouldn't, teenagers aged between 15 and 19 are indeed the most violent and dangerous people in Australia. Violent crime's the highest amongst this group, and according to the same figures, teens are responsible for a disturbing number of bashings, robberies, abductions, and apparently the worst age is 17. Worst offenders. These figures were released as part of the Australian Crime Facts and Figures report, and demographers suggest a whole pile of reasons why this might be, but the main things are the prevalence of violent video games, much easier access to alcohol, and of course changing family structures as root causes. But before we go any further, I'd really like to introduce you to our fantastic panel. Brigid Delaney, who's here on my right, I have to say right up front, is a former colleague and a good friend. I've known her a long time. She's a bit of a wild thing herself and has a bit of legendary status in my family. She blew up a full stove top coffee thing, and there was coffee completely everywhere. We cleaned it up for I don't know how long. Yeah. Brigid's debut novel, Wild Things, celebrates the passion and the raw joy of youth and the brutality of pack behaviour. She looks at the stories of a diverse group of students who are living in an archetypal elite university. Brigid was a former lawyer. She turned journalist, staff writer and editor of the Sydney Morning Herald. She's worked in digital news at The Telegraph in London. She worked at 9MSN, and she writes a lot of columns, cleverly attuned to the zeitgeist, in my view. Appeared in The Age, Martha's Vineyard Gazette, The Guardian, etc. Brigid's book, for me, Wild Things, it's still in my mind, incredibly unsettling, contemporary, timeless at the same time, and it's a story that actually jugbles many, many characters really easily. It's a first novel, and as a reader, I hope it'll be the first of many. Next, we've got Brendan Cowell, who I'm sure you all know is one of this nation's favourite and best-known actors. He works in theatre, and TV and film, smile, but he's also an incredibly prolific writer. He's written plays, scripts and adaptations, and he starred and wrote 8 episodes of one of my very favourite TV series, Love My Way, 2 of which were nominated for Augie Awards. Brendan's work writing for both TV and theatre includes the award-winning television series The Slap, the ABC TV feature The Outlaw Michael Howe, and the feature film Save Your Legs. His debut novel, How It Feels, which I've just finished, it really transported me back to Sydney. We're completely different ages, grew up in different places in Sydney, but it really looks at the devastating years of youth when your own skin feels alien and nothing's quite right and everything's right at the same time. Brendan's currently working on an original TV series for Channel 4, and he's written a play and he's working on a second novel. Steve Biddulph, one of the world's best-known parenting authors. Bit of a Bible for me as I've brought up my kids. Familiar authority in both the northern and the southern hemispheres. He has degrees in both science and psychology, and in his earliest years he worked in social policy, studying unemployment. Steve was at the coalface working in the relatively new field of family therapy in the late 70s, and then he went on to the UK and the US to further his studies. His first book was written during a week off. That was a bit quick. during a year off, where he was supported by his wife Sharon, who then became a co-author. And it was the first book was called The Secret of Happy Children. This book has been in print continuously for 29 years, which is quite a record, and it was translated into 32 languages. Since then, he's written several bestsellers. New Manhood, which I think we all know, Raising Girls, Raising Boys. He's often on the international stage offering intelligent and heartfelt advice on juggling being a mum, a dad, or both. And his long-term work as a therapist has also been complemented by community work. Steve was at the forefront of working for 5 years to get a memorial in Canberra for the 300 and more souls that went down in the refugee boat, the CFX. Steve practices what he preaches. He wrote a book about marriage with his wife Sharon, and he's been married for 39 years happily. Last but not least, Michael Parker. Michael's had a hectic week this week. He's moved house as well as he's moved jobs, and he's settled into the challenge of a new job as Headmaster of Oxley College in the Southern Highlands. Michael too started his career as a lawyer. There's two of them here, but he discovered quite quickly a love of teaching and appears not to have looked back. Most recently, he was the Deputy Headmaster and head of the senior school at Cranbrook. And he himself is the author of a novel about teen violence called Doppelganger, which was shortlisted for a Premier's Award. He's written a number of textbooks, legal studies, philosophy and English, and was the creative force between the much talked about course on school ethics and thinking in New South Wales. His most recent work is the second in a series titled Talk with Your Kids, Big Ideas, which is an incredibly inspiring book. It effectively provides a kind of thoughtful Q&A into raising big ideas, capital B-I, conversations with your kids, from Descartesian thought to the pros and cons of capitalism, Marxism, how to talk about death. Really fantastic books. So I'd like to really welcome all four of you and our audience here today, and I'd like to make our session as informal as we can. Make sure, please, your phones are off and you're not allowed to take photos or record. And afterwards, of course, we'll have a Q&A, and our authors will be signing books in the foyer next door. So, shall we start? I think we should perhaps start with Brendan. Mainly because the reality is that when we talk about youth violence, we're really talking about boys. 90% of the time that we talk about these statistics, it is boys. So much of your work is infused with that sense of boys' inability to talk to each other. They seem not to be able to express their emotions, really just not good at communicating amongst themselves. Can you talk to us a little bit about how they share experiences, considering they can't do that?
I could communicate about that, but then that might cancel the whole idea of men communicating out. And I just want to warn the audience that I could get violent at any time during the next 45 minutes. But yeah, it's funny. I've realised in the last year or so, I kind of do go around town talking about masculinity a fair bit on different shows, and I've become quite proud of that. And my opinion keeps changing, which I think it keeps it interesting for me. And instead of just kind of going out and saying the same things about men communicating, and the whole idea of, because I think being a teenager is really stressful. It's stressful being young, and I think behaviour manifests from a combination of your external life and your internal life. And I think when you're a teenager, your internal life is so vivid and so intense that sometimes if you get confused or humiliated, an outburst can erupt that can be seemingly violent to yourself or to others. And that's always fascinated me with my writing, why men drink until they're kind of insanely drunk that they punch someone, or why they drive a car so fast, towards a wall, and why do we have this kind of inner roar? Because my experience of being a young man and growing up around young men is that young boys are very sweet, they're very caring. I've known a lot of football players who go out and tear each other's heads off, but you meet them and they're really gentle, lovely, family-based men. I think that's a misconception, is that, angry young men are angry young men. I think they become angry because of confusion and the stress of being young. But the whole idea of maybe kind of placating that or assisting that by men communicating, the more and more I think about it, the more I think, I don't know if men talking things out is actually helpful. I think there's an intimacy with language that women find easy with each other. You only have to watch Sex and the City or something, you know what I mean? Or go to a hen's night, you know what I mean? Women seem to be able to express themselves with each other wonderfully, and that's admirable. But I think guys, I'm not sure that's the thing that we do, and I'm not sure talking it out is often, you know, helpful. I think it's about connection for men, and it's about proximity. And I find the fact that men like being together, and I think that's what helps us out, and connecting with something, be it sport or drinking or whatever it might be, or watching something or talking about something. I can have conversations with my mates about rugby league or about something completely different, and we kind of heal our problems throughout that conversation about Paul Gallen's ankle injury. You know what I mean? Like, something comes out of that together, and I think it's often mystifying to women why men stand in cricket fields, you know, all day in whites, rubbing a red leather ball against their inner thigh or something. We're being together, and I think connectivity and proximity is something that helps men. If we can find a way to connect with something, I think that therapy is a whole lot more useful than perhaps the big chat. But you know, I was brought up in Cronulla, which I've written a lot about, and especially in my book How It Feels, which is not an autobiography, even though all of it kind of happened. But but that deals a lot with youth suicide, and where I grew up, it's utopia. It's beautiful, green lawns, wonderful family people, hilarious people, a lot of love, golden retrievers, beaches, you know what I mean? But a lot of men took their own lives. A lot of my friends took their own lives. And that, I think, continues to fascinate me because I don't know why they're not here. And I think it's got something to do with, you know, why young men are violent. I think because sometimes they don't know what to do and they feel invisible, or sometimes they just want to make a mark because they don't know who they are. And there's something inherently theatrical with suicide. It's always kind of in the parent's bed or in the tree at that place, or there's always seems to be a message with that final moment. And for me, it has a lot to do with the fact that I think often when you're a teenager, you don't know that there are other pools you'll swim in. You don't know that there'll be other girlfriends, other jobs, that the fact that you just got called a poofter or whatever doesn't mean you're a poofter, and if you are a poofter, that's okay. But you think, no, that's it. That's the final blow for me. You know, I got done DUI on my P plates. Dad's gonna be really angry at me. I'll walk into the water. You know what I mean? And so what I try to tell young men or express to young men is that that's just an obstacle in a great kind of story with many chapters. And you'll look back and go, oh God, do you remember that, Dad? You know what I mean? And maybe
giggle about it rather
than, that's, I think because life's so stressful as a young person, you can often not see the bigger picture, and I hope some of that made sense. Yeah.
Certainly did. Bridget, your book is, Brenda was talking about shared experience. Your book is very much about that, isn't it? It's your protagonists are mainly boys in this elite university, but they share a terrible, terrible crime. What moved you to make that the shared experience? And do you think that kind of pack behaviour, you know, is it easier? Is it a shared experience?
Is it easier to commit a crime if there's many of you? I think so. What happens in my book is that the crime is committed at the start of the novel. It involves a cricket team who go away to the bush. They're students at a university college. And so at the start of the book, an overseas student has been assaulted, and he runs out into the bush, and the cricket team have to make a decision. Do we go and find this guy and look after him and try and repair what we've done, or do we just kind of see if we can cover it up and get away with it? And the cricket team, it's very large, obviously, so that's many characters in the book, was split down the middle. Half the team goes searching, the other half stay. And the novel then explores what happens when you have a group of people whose morality is shifting, and which side of this team wins. Is it the side that feel guilty and want to repair the damage, or is it the people who believe that they can act without consequence? And the reason why I decided to write a book about people committing crimes in a group was that I saw a lot of, working as a journalist, I saw a lot of really interesting stories involving groups committing crimes, particularly young men. So one of the really interesting cases was the Trinity Grammar case, that happened, I think, in the early 2000s or late 90s, where a group of students sexually assaulted an overseas student in the boarding house, or a number of overseas students. And I was fascinated by that case. I thought, how does this group function as a group if at the heart of it they've done this terrible thing? And I was also interested in the sentencing of those guys, and looking at whether or not had they been maybe less privileged, would the sentencing have been different? And that case kind of haunted me a bit. And the other cases, like the ADFA Skype scandal, groups of men hazing female students or male students. The Diane Brimble cruise ship case, a group of men involved somehow in the death of a woman, and you know, kind of locking in together as a group and not talking to the police, or maybe not, you know, not sharing information that helped in that investigation. So I thought it was a really ripe subject matter for a novelist. And when you're that age, so my characters are 17 to 22, I think, as Brendan said, you know, your morality is shifting, but you've also got all these, you know, things going on internally. And it's, as I said, it's set at a university, and I found my first years at uni felt like my world was exploding. I was exposed to so much knowledge, new people. You know, it was almost like I couldn't contain myself. It was great. So I really think that putting the combination of a crime and people that age together can create an interesting narrative.
Certainly has. It certainly has. Michael, it leads in perfectly, because in your novel Doppelganger, your characters are swept forward in a kind of violent gang. So again, it's groups, isn't it? And boys' boarding schools and university colleges are often the ones that make the news, as Brigid was saying, and that's exactly where you've worked. Have you seen this kind of perpetuation of rituals, this kind of pack behaviour among boys, or the potential for it? And how do you, as the head of a school or a master, how do you watch for it and then try and contain these
And
these
I think
things?
the watching for it and the being very careful about it is core. And I've seen the whole spectrum of behaviour, I guess you'd say, but also very much the positive side of people's behaviour. When I was a younger man, I went on a series of eventually 10 outward bound camps, which are 9-day courses with young kids. And in the first one, I went out and thought, I'm going to save these 14-year-olds from the Lord of the Flies experience that they're inevitably about to end up in. And as I went out, it wasn't like that at all. Out in the bush, the main things that came out were their ability to cooperate with each other, the ability to help each other every morning, whether it was packing the tent or working out how to cook or getting the firewood or whatever. And it was those things that you saw so much more of. I also worked, I was in the boarding house at Cranbrook for about 5 years. And something that I still remember is there was one time where we brought in a boy who was very troubled. He'd actually been living on the streets in the weeks previously, but with social services and parents. We brought him into the community. And the bad news story was that he immediately instigated this ritualistic bullying of the younger kids and started to enlist some others to help. And it was mainly physical, but it almost started to get a little bit worse. But the point of the story is within 2 days, so less than 48 hours, I had a knock on my door at 1 a.m. And when that happens in a boarding house, you think, oh, something's gone terribly wrong. And it was 5 of the 9 Year 11 guys who had got together and said, we're going to go and tell somebody right now what's happening. And they agreed with it together. They came and said what had started because it offended their values of community, it offended their culture. So the angels won in this. And by 8 o'clock in the morning, the boy, it was a sad story because of his own difficult background, but by 8 in the morning, that boy was no longer a part of the community. And it had been absolutely nipped in the bud it was less than 2 days, and it was the boys themselves who had instigated it and had said, this is bad, no more. So I've seen a lot of heartwarming, positive, affirming stuff as well. In fact, that's the main experience that I'd look back to.
Well, that's a relief. Well, Steve, I mean, in developmental terms, and it leads on perfectly because you've written pretty much that youth violence is a failure of emotional intelligence in young men, isn't it? And Brigid's story, some of the protagonists certainly fall within that framework, and in Brendan's work, there's obviously the suggestion that so many young men struggle with this kind of thing. But not all young men, as Michael said, react with violence. So what, in your view, leads to this and what can be done to...
Sure, I'll talk about what leads to it first. When I was thinking about talking about this, there's some really important things that are background to remember about this, which is, first of all, that we've wanted young men to be violent for centuries. That's been their main role in the culture, is to be sent off on wars, and so that's been their value, was as fighters and harmers. And we killed 100 million people in the last century in government-sanctioned wars. Greatly, we'll never match that in any other forms of violence. And so there's a sudden reversal that's happened in our culture where we don't want that anymore, apart from occasionally on a football field. But in my early days, I worked with quite a few soldiers, and mostly from the Vietnam War, but sometimes people from back in the Second World War. And these were mostly 19-year-olds, and so very young men. And as you may have read or seen in studies, it's actually very difficult to get young men to be violent. You know, those training videos that you see with people bayoneting sacks and things like that, there's a very long process to overcome our natural inhibitions about that. A great number of young men in combat either don't fire their weapons or they deliberately fire them wild of any target. And when it comes to the crunch and they've actually got to shoot somebody, they have years of difficulties overcoming the fact that they actually killed someone. And so we're not a violent animal, despite the bad press that we get. And but we start violent. Little toddlers are very violent. And it's in our nature to early on to hit out. But what stops us is primarily empathy. That you feel like hitting we all feel like hitting people every day, particularly in the current political climate. But what stops us doing it is and the soldiers that I worked with would say was, this is another human being like me, and that causing harm and causing death and causing suffering. We feel that in a healthy, mentally healthy human being. We feel that empathy with other people, and it stops us from injuring them because it feels like an injury to us as well. Now, that's certainly not always the case, or we wouldn't be talking today. And so the most important study I think that was ever done into violence was done in the 60s, and it was in The Secret of Happy Children. It was in that book. It was by a man called Prescott. He was an anthropologist. And what he discovered by studying pretty much the whole field of anthropology was that there was a very strong, predictable correlation in cultures between the amount of touching that was given to children. So if children were cuddled and it was an affectionate and a warm culture, then it was also a very non-violent culture. And if it was and sometimes these were villages in Papua New Guinea that were just, over the other side of the mountains. Everything else was the same. But in cultures where there wasn't very much touching of infants and children, violence was much more widespread. And so we think that what happens is that the capacity for empathy and for gentleness and for feeling connected was the word that you used, is learned literally on a mother's knee. And if a culture is gentle and nurturing to its children, the empathy parts of their brain grow. They feel a sense of oneness with other people. And the last thing they'd want to do is cause harm to them. And so we're right now living in a culture where, once again, affection is an endangered quality. So middle-class people now are very affectionate. And we've developed a thawing out in Anglo-Saxon culture. Dads cuddle kids now. They would never have done that 50 years ago. And that's actually the best thing we can do to reduce violence in the culture. Now, another perspective that's really important is, for instance, that most violence in our culture is not to other people. We hear that a woman dies every week in Australia on average from domestic violence in the home, which is bad enough. But that's 50 a year, but 5 men a day take their own lives. So there's a 30 times greater incidence of self-violence over violence to others. And when we look at the young people that are committing the acts of robbery and assault, they're not average kids. They have a very distinctive kind of background. They're usually poor, they're unsuccessful in school, they have family stresses and difficulties. You can identify them in primary school. You can identify them in kindy, the boys that are going to be a problem with violence, because it's just that in teens is when you go over the top and you get locked up for that. But it's been happening all through. Yes.
Thank you. And that's really interesting in terms of the early years. But Michael, just quickly back to you. If those early years have not been as successful in bonding and all the resilience factors that Steve's talking about, do you think that talking and the subjects of your book is to engage older kids in these kind of questions, offering them offering them conundrums to sort out? Do you think that can help later? Is it something that you see that has curbed this kind of...
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the intellectual on its own doesn't work without the affective as well. However, I think the rational part of it is incredibly important. I mean, our culture ethically has gone from an authoritarian command model where either your parents or the church or somebody told you all of the moral codes and you did very, very little to respond to it, to a culture a far more secular culture, which also has an element of not exactly anything goes, but it's very hard to say, well, these are a set of values and we think these are better as parents, and we really want to make sure our kids get those as well. So it sort of slid from authoritarian to permissive. And I think there's this zone in the middle, which is a liberal, rigorous, rational one, where on one hand, the kids are not being told that this is right. They get a chance to talk about it, and we all know that we believe things ourselves that we've thought up ourselves, that have come up through our own brain. So if, as a culture and a family and a set of schools, we give kids the opportunity to talk and to rationalise in a structured way and come up with the ideas themselves, then you've got something very powerful. So an example I can think of is I was talking with a group of boys about the rules of a rugby game. And the particular rule that came up was no balking in a line-out, which is just a rule of rugby. I said, well, if the ref wasn't watching, would you cheat on the rule? Would you do it? And the first 2 or 3 said, yeah, we'd do it. It's up to the ref. If the ref doesn't catch us, well, why do we have to do it? That's their job. And I was sort of chewing my knuckles off and then sort of starting to chew my arm off, waiting for somebody to say, no, you're supposed to do it because the ref is there organising the game. But I held off, and I tried to massage the conversation around rather than just come in with an authoritarian, no, that's wrong because whatever. And eventually, about the fourth person who spoke said, no, we've agreed to play this game, so we're all agreeing as we walk onto the field that these are the rules, and the ref is there to be the guardian of it, but it's up to us all to do those rules as well. Otherwise, what game are we playing? Which is an analogue of all of society coming into a civilised society and agreeing to abide by its rules. And this student, particularly because he was a well-regarded student, then brought the others around bit by bit, and the conversation kept going back and forth. But when we walked out of the room, I think pretty well all of them, the overwhelming majority of them, had come to the view that you obey the rules of a game because it's intrinsic in you, and not because the ref is making you do it. And my point here is that I think that greater ethical sense that they had stuck in so many of the kids because it came out of them, because they came up with the ideas, rather than were told them. And you multiply that by 100 conversations over a series of years, and I think it's an incredibly vital way of making sure that kids are ethically mature. But it's a hard thing for parents to do.
Keep doing
the things you've got to do, like to be devil's advocate, to listen to your child, to make sure that you're doing less than half of the talking. All of those things are vital, and it's not hardwired in people. In fact, I think it's a bit counterintuitive. And that's why I'm so interested in the area, and the books are on it. Do I have time for one more slight anecdote, or should we keep moving?
Quick anecdote, and then... I asked my kids at the dinner table last night, do you think, my kids are 8 and 9, and I said, do you think Tony Abbott's budget is fair? Now... Had to get this one in.
And of course, they said, no. And I was trying to play a little bit of devil's advocate about what it is when, you've heard the lines over the airwaves over the last couple of weeks. And I did that and had a genuine back and forth, but I knew that my kids knew I was just playing devil's advocate. I was putting another view, not because I strongly believed it, but because we were teasing it out together. And what they come up with at the end of it is something that again is sticky, is something that is stuck to their heads.
Yeah. Interesting. Bridge and Brendan, you're the young ones of this group, and you've both. I include myself here. And you've both, created these youthful characters that contemplate and then make some terrible decisions, in the opposite to what we're talking about here: drink, drugs, suicide in some cases, crime. I'm interested as fiction writers, morality. Brigid, you look at the desire to find the moral compass. One of your characters finds religion and kind of tries to seek solace in that. Tell us a little bit about, both of you, about your own experiences and how much of your fiction is coloured by the things that you've seen yourselves or experienced yourselves. Ladies first, shall we?
Okay. The book is set, as I said, at a university college, and I did go to college at Melbourne Uni, and then I was a live-in tutor at a Sydney University college. So it was based on things that I've observed. The religion thing was interesting, though. When I was working at the Herald, I noticed a kind of a trend in young people joining new churches like Hillsong, and I was sent out. Maybe you sent me out to do. So I became a member of a church briefly for a while. Going to Friday night masses, and I interviewed a lot of young people at these churches, and I said, why are you here? And they said, Mum and Dad were atheists, I'm suddenly 18 or 19 and I feel like there's a massive gap and I don't know what that gap is. And it was a kind of a meaning vacuum. These kids were feeling like they needed a framework that they weren't getting at home, and religion, particularly some of the newer churches, provided a very clear sense of this is what you do, this is how you worship, this is, the structure. It's kind of like an IKEA, assemble yourself your own moral framework. And in my book, when the characters have, their moral world doesn't exist, and it throws some of the characters into complete existential confusion. And so one of the characters becomes involved in a campus group called the Jerusalems, which is my ideal religion. I made it up, which made me feel kind of vaguely cult-like and godlike. And the Jerusalems are socialist Christians, so they live by the words, whatever you do to the least of my brothers, you do to me, which I think is a just a fantastic grounding creed. And this character is the child of very wealthy, highly materialistic people who haven't given him a moral framework. And whatever you can say about religion, and there's often not a lot of positive things to say about it at the moment with the Royal Commissions into abuse, etc., at least you can say that it does provide something. It does provide a sense of this is correct, this is incorrect. And if you are lost, it can be a very powerful tool.
To direct you a bit. Yeah. Brendan, you were saying earlier that some of your friends' decisions to end their lives are still haunting you. It colours the way you write and what you think about. Yeah. They were terribly difficult. They obviously decisions that went terribly wrong. How?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think you ever, that's what's so cruel about suicide. I don't think anyone who's associated with a person who's no longer here ever gets over it and ever clears themselves of some sort of responsibility, because you were in their lives when they decided to leave, and that's what's so really just so hard about it. But I think when you're young, you know, you kind of, I think everyone feels a bit, you know, a bit like an alpaca or something. Like, you know, an alpaca's like a camel, donkey, horse. You know, it's not quite any of those animals, but it's kind of like this weird nearly an animal that's another animal. But and that's kind of how you feel, a bit like a freak. And that can make you really angry. Like, I wasn't a violent person when I was young. I was on TV when I was very young, so I had a hard time at school and I got picked on a lot. But sometimes, like, I remember when we went away and we'd just, me and this guy Daniel, would catch these yabbies and then we'd take them back and we'd just get a compass and we just fucking stab them, you know what I mean? And then we'd feel better. And then I remember when my mate Johnny and I were dating my mate Johnny and I were dating these two girls, and we like took them into Paddington and watched movies with subtitles and everything, you know what I mean? And we never got any action with the girls, like, but that might have been because we never really put the foot on the accelerator. We were just like, you know, something will happen that'll be sex-like soon. And then they broke up with us and then shagged two dudes the week later, and we were like, fuck, we were there for 6 months talking to Paddington markets and everything, like, didn't even get like a boob feel over the cashmere sweater or nothing, you know what I mean? And then I remember us driving out in my Ford Laser, like, we drove to Wollongong and then just got out near this fence, just got these rocks and just fucking threw rocks at a fence for like 20 minutes, going, just screaming, throwing rocks at a fence, and then got back in the car, drove back to Cronulla, and that was kind of done after that. And, you know, I remember another mate, like, just being on the Oval, and, you know, because you guys are talking about where violence comes from, and there's violent people and non-violent people, and I've worked with people in jails and stuff, and some of them think everyone's a criminal. Criminals are in here. There's no one in here who isn't a criminal. And other people say there's a lot of unlucky people, and this could happen to anyone. You know, and I kind of don't know about that. I mean, my mate who left the world, that affected me the most, he changed my life. Like, he was the big guy at school, and I started helping him after school with his education, and then he started looking after me, and then the word got out that you can't mess with Cowell anymore, you know what I mean? And that was really good, you know what I mean? And then we started playing basketball together, and he was quite tall and I was quite like a good pass. I was good with passing and everything. And then if someone pushed me or called me a name off TV or one of the ads I was in, he'd just go over to them and just fucking break their jaw. And then he wouldn't be able to play basketball for another 6 months, you know what I mean? But that was very violent. But the level of loyalty and love that we had for each other was immense. And there's a connection between young men in friendship that happens on sporting fields and off the sporting fields that's ridiculously strong and loving. And I felt that, you know what I mean, from him. He respected me. I told him story. We kind of gave each other so much. And he changed my teenage experience from horrible, and from me having horrible thoughts to feeling quite strong and liking myself and refusing to change and continuing to recite poetry at assembly, even though I knew everyone wanted to bash me for it, you know what I mean? Well, I was like, no, I'm going to be this guy. And you know, so it's confusing. One more point is interesting about sport, because I'm writing a play for MTC called The Sublime. It's about to a AFL player, NRL player and a teenage girl at an end of season trip to Thailand. You know what I mean? Comedy ensues. And I think about rugby because I like rugby league players, and it's true what you're saying. It's fascinating is that we are, we always look at these rugby league players and who've glassed their girlfriend, or they've, urinated on each other, or punched a girl, or punched each other. And we go, all rugby league players are horrible people off the field. And you watch what they do, it's like two trucks running at each other. And when you play rugby league, and I played rugby league till I was about 16, till it started to hurt, and I went, I'll go to the arts. Emotional pain's better than that. Pain. It was just like, because Greek guys that I was playing against were like my size, then I came around the next year and they were just fucking enormous with beards. I was like, I'm not tackling that dude, But asking a guy to go on a football field for 80 minutes, and we were told to crush the other man, to destroy him. And football games are one up the middle with the forwards. You have to destroy the other man. And like after I do a play, I feel very charged up. Like I come off stage going, I can't do anything. Imagine what that's like coming off the football field. And then society, who wants them to be gladiators, we want them to crush each other. Then we want them to have a chamomile tea, read some early Dickens and go to sleep. That's implausible, and that's our fault for expecting that they will behave like normal people in society. You can't watch Warriors and then expect angels. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's our responsibility and it's our fault.
Point very well made, I think.
Got a bit fired up then, didn't I?
It dawns on me that as we're chatting, that actually we've seemed to have been concentrating on young men, not a word about young women. In fact, we were talking about it in the green room earlier. I mean, there have been rises recorded in girls' violence in Australia, Canada, the UK, US. A lot of people find it hard to reach agreement on this too, but we were saying earlier that if you think about a really evil female character in a book of fiction, nobody could really think of one. What do you think about, Steve, with girls? I mean, are girls becoming more violent because of certain reasons, or...?
Yes, they are. It's very clear that there is a group of young women who, I think it was 2012 was the first year that young women in Australia consumed more alcohol than young men did in history. They overtook them. So we're having a mental health crisis amongst young women as well. And I think we need to look at violence problems as a mental health problem rather than a criminal one. And I'd love, Paola, if it's okay, to talk about what the solutions are to this, because what we know about it, if you think about an example of violence that like obviously comes to mind, is the Packer Gingell street fight that happened a couple of weeks ago. We know exactly how that works now. There's a part of our brain that's called the amygdala, and it's kind of our lizard brain, and it responds in danger and threat, and it just says hit. That's what that part of the brain, hit or run, or have sex, depending on the three options that are available in any situation. And so the thing that Michael was talking about was developing your thinking abilities so that you got a nice structure up here to figure out what's the right thing to do. So our brain, though, isn't very well designed. It's designed like a country farmhouse in that it's had extra bits added on over time. And so we've got the amygdala right in the middle, looking after survival issues. And then we've got the prefrontal cortex up the front that thinks, oh, yeah, that's a nice option I should take here, and so on. And under sufficient stress or anxiety, we have what I think it's Michael Carr-Gregg calls an amygdala hijack. And your lizard brain just takes over. And so and the problem is, when that's more likely to happen is when you have a high background level of anxiety anyway, through adolescence, through family breakup, through whatever's going on in the world around you, through a violent culture around you. You're running at this, and it's incredibly scary to be a teenage boy in a group of teenage boys, especially, say, out on the streets with other groups of teenage boys. That's a terrifying experience. Boys don't drink because they like the taste of alcohol. They drink to try and just take away the tension that they feel. And so what we know about this, how to help this, is that there's a kind of a condition that males in our culture have, and it's not true of other cultures necessarily, which is somebody, an expert in domestic violence called it normative male alexithymia. And what that is, it's a complete inability to express what's going on inside of you. And so, has anyone here seen the film Analyze This? It was a film about Robert De Niro, about a gangster who goes for counselling. And the minute that a man is able to say, I'm angry here, or I'm frightened here, and to put that into words and move it up here, his entire body chemistry changes. He shifts from being full of tension, which he doesn't have a name for, to being someone who's reflecting on his own tension. And so what we need to do with young men, and the most beneficial things which are happening in schools...
Don't forget girls, though.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
Well,
girls,
it's the
girls.
same. It's exactly the same with girls. Is that... But girls have had the natural advantage of the culture, and they're also born more verbal. Their brains are more verbal. And so given the chance... Girls, as Brendan said, girls have a talk about it. And they tend to offload tension routinely, and they tend to think about their feelings all the time. If we're able to give that skill to young men and pass on that capacity, and I've got people in primary schools doing this now, saying, how do you know the difference between when you're scared and when you're angry? Because little boys will hit someone when they're sad. You know, they'll feel grief, and so they'll punch somebody. You know, my best friend is leaving school, so they hit them. It's true. I mean, you've encountered this. And so if we provide the language skills and the self-awareness body skills to be able to say, this is happening to me, what should I do with that? Whether you're male or female or somewhere in between, then you'll be better equipped to walk away. We all have opportunities for violence all the time. Most of us hold back, calm down, breathe deep, think about it, talk to a friend, and we bypass that danger.
Do any of you, just probably as a kind of last question before we turn to our audience, do you think, have you observed more women getting violent in the pub, more girls getting more vocal? I mean, is it something that you see, you've observed yourselves, Bridge?
I narrowly avoided being glassed a few months ago, but look, it's.
What do you think it is?
Well, I think it's booze. I think it's you know, pubs are crowded. They can be crowded, noisy, sexual hunting grounds, a place to let off steam after an incredibly, you know, hard week. And if you step on someone's foot accidentally or spill their drink,
Exactly
you know,
what Steve said. Boom.
Yeah. You know, to cop an ashtray to the head or a glass, and I think it's a sense of the environment itself is not conducive to calm. You know, pubs aren't calm places. You know, 1 o'clock on a Friday night. I work as an editor of a news website, and whenever we put up a story about girls behaving badly or violent girls, we get a huge number of clicks. Like, people are really interested and very engaged in that as a cultural phenomenon. So I don't know whether or not, because we're publishing more of these stories, that it's actually occurring more, or if there's just more interest in reading about girls behaving badly, so therefore it appears that they are behaving badly.
Behaving more badly.
Yeah.
Do you agree, to finish up?
I've had women be violent at me before, but I probably deserved it. But I was just up in Darwin, you know, and it was just fascinating up there. But I saw a lot of, you know, I saw a few women fighting in Darwin on the street, in pubs, and it looked like men fighting. It was the same kind of thing, like, this is the only thing we can do, let's fight. Speaking of men fighting, there was a guy, like, up there, guys just want to fight. And then, because it's fun, like outside the pub, like a guy, you know, will come up to you in a pub and go, do you want to fucking fight me? And you go, not really. And he'll go, oh mate, good to meet you. You know what I mean? And then you see him out the front, he's having a fight, and you go, you guys all right? And he goes, yeah, it's my brother. And it's like just this kind of need to, it's hot, I've got to hit someone. I've got to hit something. You know what I mean? And I think that's an interesting thing with men, because I think there's something inexplicable about how angry you feel and this rage, especially when you're young. that you need to find a way to express it. And I'm not sure talking it out is the thing, I guess is what I'm starting to think. But you have to connect with something and find a way to purge it or understand or get it out, or it will manifest in stabbing a yabby or punching your mate in the face. That's where it needs to go somewhere, and that's why music is a beautiful thing. And I found expressing myself through writing, and I was lucky that I could do it. But if you can find somewhere to connect with other men, make yourself understood, that's pretty much the only hope we've got, because that rage isn't going away.
I think we need to turn to our audience now. We've questions out for our panel. In the middle, I think there are microphones on either side, I hope.
Hi, my name's Margie Sullivan, and thank you for this conversation. It's a really important, wonderful one to have. I'm interested in the idea between where all this anger comes from and how it relates back to what Steve is saying about early attachment and helping develop empathy, and how we can bring this more into the mainstream media so that people realise those early 2 or 3 years of a child's life are so profoundly important in relation to everything we're talking about.
Who'd like to take that one?
Yes, well, I'm trying as hard as I can.
Yeah, I know.
But it's a really great thing to focus on. Yeah. Because where the anger comes from is mostly, we know that little boys who are hit as children are twice as likely to be violent. But if they see their dad hitting their mum, they're 7 times more likely to be violent. And so we have to do something about those vulnerable, fragile families, so low income, low education, stressed out young families in the first couple of years. So early intervention with at-risk families, so mum can relax, then she can attach properly. So dad knows, the wonderful work Richard Fletcher is doing at the University of Newcastle, just getting in with young dads and really supporting them in that first couple of months where they're still keen to be a dad, and saying you're special and you're really important and your baby knows your voice, and building the dad-child bond. And so it's sort of focusing on something completely different than police and prisons and things like that. But and it's exactly what our current government policy is not doing. I think we're going to create a very violent society if we build in this unfairness that we were talking about, and take resources away from young single mums and things like that. That's the place to spend the money wisely. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's just, it seems like no one in political life is getting that message or even know about it. I mean, do they even know this stuff? Does anyone? I don't know. I mean, I know you're trying to tell them, but anyway, I guess that's a comment at the end. But thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Over here in the second row.
My question is primarily to Steve Biddulph. I'm the mother of 2 boys, a 14 and a 9-year-old, and before I had my boys, the only 2 men in my life were my father and my husband. So thank you for the book. The comment that I'd like to make is you've mentioned twice that the at-risk people are poor, and at our local school, what I noticed is I spent a lot of time at the school. One year, I'll give you an example, we had 3 children who formed a gang, and one was a girl. She was from I wouldn't say a financially deprived background, but there was 4 children, the parents both worked. Now the other 2 children were boys who came from a financially
we need to
background.
Question.
Please? The question is, the comment is it always people who were poor? Because what I found was that it wasn't. And it had to do with the question the other lady talked about, the emotional attachment. These 2 children hadn't had that attention. So can you comment on that?
Yes, I think you've answered that. I think in very broad picture, you're better to be in the middle, because rich people tend to neglect their children too. And so you have affluent neglect and you have poverty neglect. And it has exactly the same effects. And I think that's behind what you identified in your private, expensive university colleges.
Yeah, very much so.
Neglected rich kids who don't know much about affection and had uninvolved dads. The kind of people that are now running the country. Yeah, but yes, it was spot on.
We dealt with that a lot in
Can we fit one more? One more question over here. It's my daughter.
Hello.
Hello, darling.
I have a question. I'll be really quick, but I work in youth homelessness and I've worked with young people in the juvenile justice system for the last 8 years. And I guess on one hand, we as people now, we have far less human connection, far less physical contact with each other with the rise of social media, with email, with text. I imagine having absent role models in our life, young people are far less, they have less of an ability to model their behaviour around what the people around them are doing, controlling their anger, dealing with their emotions effectively and expressing them. On the other hand, children and young people have 24-hour contact with their peers because of the same thing. Point. I'm wondering what kind of impact you think that's having on the development of a rational head, basically. Anyone can answer it.
You pick. Who would you like to?
I would be really rude, but I forget people's names. So
Brigid, Brendan, Steve and Michael.
Steve.
Okay.
Sorry, Steve.
That's fine.
Need some pointers.
Yeah.
These are my
the
people.
others feel very unpopular. I'm afraid this is going to have to be the last one because I'm getting it.
You're right. Social media, we're just understanding how incredibly cruel people can be over social media, and it seems to be the lack of visual feedback that we're causing hurt. But the thing wrong with our culture is that we've got everyone stratified. Peer groups hang out together. There's not enough cross-age. So girls, for example, I did get to your question, was girls don't have enough aunties in their life and enough grandmas in their life. So they look to the peer group, and the peer group are as lost as they are. And so we need to put back face-to-face contact with people of very varying ages. So you've got a grandma figure in your life, you've got an auntie figure, you have a cool auntie that you can tell things that you can't tell mum. And once we embed young people in that kind of matrix of multiple ages, then they won't commit suicide and they won't hurt other people. There'll be someone who's fielding their distress and calming their fears. And that's what the kids are trying to provide for each other in Facebook in the middle of the night. But that's the default. They really need real people. Yeah.
Great question and great answer. I'd really like you to put your hands together for our fantastic panel. Really, thank you so much.